There is a wonderful scene in the preview they gave of Season 5 of The Dragon Prince that got me thinking a lot about the differences between Callum and Rayla, the cultures they come from, and how they can, without ignoring those differences or pretending those differences do not exist, transcend those differences to create a larger sense of commonality, a larger sense of community and connection, a larger dynamic where they can know each other despite these differences. The scene is simple enough, but it has significant symbolic weight. Callum and Rayla, having packed their relationship somewhat back together in Season 4, they have not solved the underlying problems of that relationship, and they still have a lot of work to do in order to build a stronger foundation for the two of them so that their relationship does not fall apart like it did earlier, because Rayla was not willing to commit to it. She was not willing to be as open to Callum as they agreed that she should be. It's not how she was raised, it's not what she's accustomed to, and when pressed into a difficult situation, she ultimately turns against her words to Callum and defaults back to her stance of leaving people to do what she believes is best for them, keeping them safe, being the strong protector figure, but ultimately withdrawing herself from any sort of emotional vulnerability. Okay. But the scene of them stargazing, a brilliant scene to give as a teaser for Season 5, says a lot about how there are these significant differences between them, and ignoring these differences in this burst of utopian fervor is perhaps not sufficient. They talk about these different stars and constellations, and Callum views them in a way that is probably pretty familiar to us. Not surprising, since he is a human and we are humans, even if he is a human in a distant world. Rayla, however, views the constellations much differently. She views them much more mythically. There are all these stories and legends that ensconce and interweave Rayla's conceptions of the constellations. Some of them are quite terrifying, some of them are quite beautiful and poignant. Now, I'm not saying that Callum's ideas of the stars are completely unmediated by culture and legends and rituals and practices. That would be impossible. Everyone, I think, has these kinds of legends. But the difference is that for Callum, they are largely passive. When we look up at the stars, for instance, and we see Orion, that's, of course, a mythological reference, but it's one that is mostly inert to us. That's not to say it has no importance whatsoever, or that we don't comprehend the connection to the mythic past, but we don't feel that connection. We don't feel vibrantly and viscerally that all these stories from the mythic world are there in the cosmos. We just have a remnant of this older, perhaps more primordial sense of belief and experience. For Rayla, coming from the elves, who are more mystical, those stories are alive, they matter, they have significance to Rayla and to her culture in a way that is different from Callum. It's not better or worse, but it's a fundamentally different way of viewing the world. Now, that is not to say Rayla is 100% allowing her life to be led by what she sees in these stories of the stars, but they are fundamentally immediate to her. Phenomenologically, they are a part of her experience of the world in a way that is not really the case with Callum. So that matters, but it doesn't matter so much that they can't share the experience of stargazing together, that they can't both feel this connection to the stars and to each other in this experience. So there are two layers here. There's the layer of difference, their diverging perspectives that come not just from different kinds of stories and rituals and myths, but from a discrepancy in how intensely and how immediately they view those elements of cultural significance. But then there is the other view, the view that despite these differences, they are able to share this moment together. It is important to both of them, has meaning and relevance to both of them, both as individuals and as a part of this very special and intimate moment they're sharing. I think a lot about John Rawls, whom the show does place a lot of significance and weight in. John Rawls was an American philosopher of the late 20th century, probably the most recent American philosopher who was important enough to have the kind of significance that we ascribe to figures like Emerson or William James, for instance. Rawls was referenced implicitly by King Harrow when Harrow talks about what justice is to him, what a moral and fair society is. It is one where one not having any idea of how they would exist in a society, whether they would be at the top or the bottom, would still choose this society, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of their status. It is a society that would fundamentally work for everyone. This is more or less a direct reference to Rawls's conception of justice as fairness. This idea that while there is no perfect society, there is no utopian society, the most advantageous society, the one that we should work toward, is one that we all would choose if we were behind the veil, if we did not know what our position would be in the society, if we did not know what our political stance would be, what our religious stance would be, what our perspective as a whole would be. Not just whether we'd be at the top or at the bottom, though that's important too, but if we had no idea who we would be in this society, if we had no control over that, if it was completely veiled to us, what kind of society would we choose? That's what Rawls tries to figure out. That's his conception of the kind of society that we should all be working toward. Which is definitely interesting. And one of Rawls's key ideas is overlapping consensus, which is, to put it simply, that we have different political beliefs, we have different philosophical beliefs, but they overlap in that we still want this basic structure. We still want this basic form of government, of what we consider just and good. All of this sounds very abstract, but Rawls explains it quite clearly. Imagine that, say, you and another person are of different political parties, and you don't agree on pretty much anything in terms of your explicit political stances, but you agree on things such as, say, we should have elections, and the person who wins the election should have the capacity to make decisions for the future of the country. That might not sound like a lot, but it is. Especially in the grand scope of history. We don't think about these overlapping consensuses because they are not perhaps the beliefs that we most hold dear. But they are beliefs that we consider so given, so automatic, that we expect them to be held by other people, even if we disagree with them on pretty much everything we're very passionate about, in order for society as a whole, this larger social organism, to function. I think that is what the Dragon Prince is gesturing toward, especially since we already have a pretty direct reference to Rawls. That's what it's going for, even in a scene like this adorable little stargazing scene with Callum and Rayla. At the end of Season 3, we are at a point of what I will perhaps cynically call utopian idealism, this triumphalist glory of finally defeating the bad guy, finally creating a kind of link between humans and elves, and hopefully society will turn out alright, and people will be able to move beyond the prejudices of the past. And, in reality, things aren't that simple. Are they better than they were before? Of course. But that does not mean that these challenges and difficulties, these deep differences in culture and worldview, have fundamentally gone away. These differences will remain. The challenge is, the Dragon Prince suggests, for humans and elves to find a overlapping consensus of sorts. For them not to ignore that these differences in worldview exist. They do, and Season 4 brings them up quite a bit. But to be able to think about what they can agree on, this broader societal, philosophical framework that they can agree on in order to form a more robust society that includes and protects their different political, philosophical, religious perspectives. Callum and Rayla, though, of course, not exactly a microcosm of the relations between the humans and the elves, as it is much easier for these two people to make a relationship work than it is to completely heal the rifts between these two very large groups of people. Nonetheless, the relationship between Callum and Rayla allows the show a foundation on which to work out and describe viscerally and succinctly how the differences between these two cultures are significant, and they need to be understood, and they cannot be glossed over, and nonetheless there is something that can be shared between them. For Callum and Rayla, there is this very intimate moment. There is the love between them. There is the appreciation of the experience. For humans and elves, perhaps, there is the hope that they can work together peacefully. That there can be couples like the human Callum and the elf Rayla who can share together moments like this. That these two groups of people, however different as they are, can work together peacefully. It's a difficult burden, and the Dragon Prince at its best moments does not pretend that such a formation of an overlapping consensus like this is easy. Quite the opposite. It emphasizes that it's hard and it requires humility and the overcoming of sectarian egotism, even if such tribalism is kind of hardwired into us. When we are at our best, we can transcend our biases and create a better society, even with people that we have these ardent disagreements with. Perhaps that's a bit idealistic, but the show emphasizes how difficult that is and how much of a struggle it is, and how nonetheless it's worthwhile. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and if you want to see more videos just like this one before anyone else. Keep watching The Dragon Prince. I can't wait for Season 5. Adios, comrades.